Geoff, it's really great to talk to you.
Right.
And you've been playing a really key role in the media recently for a number of weeks, speaking on the issues of slavery and how we should remember and celebrate our historical past. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've been doing?
Well, suddenly I seem to have attracted all this attention.
Yes.
And I think it started with when somebody asked me about statues. Would I remove them?
Yeah.
This is after the Colston statue was removed in Bristol.
Bristol, yeah.
And I had one or two phone calls, and they said, "Well, do you agree with that?" And I said, "No, I don't think it should be taken down." And they said, "Well, what would you do?" And I said, "I'd put plaques on them, explaining what the person did." And somehow that started it all off, because somehow within my community and within the British community, the general consensus seems to have been that statues of people like him, who were slave owners and slave masters, should come down. And I think that's where it all started, because I had this different view. Because what I said then was, if you remove the evidence, you remove the deed. And thus I feel if you start altering history, taking bits off that you don't like, then eventually we will be at a situation where the source of the consequences of racism will have disappeared.
And what do you think the mood in Scotland is around this issue now? Do you think it's the mood's changing, the behaviour and attitudes are changing and coming closer to your view, or is it not possible to say?
Well, it is possible to say. I think the view is now, in terms of the general consensus, is that people are agreeing with what I said.
Yeah.
The institutions and individuals, because they could see that taking something down could be just purely emotional.
Yeah.
And I just feel that we shouldn't be removing evidence just based on emotion, or where would we stop?
Yeah.
So this has now given me a lot to do, which I feel, I feel maybe it's a social responsibility. So I feel if I have the time, I will continue to do it.
It's fantastic. And I know from comments I've received from students that I think people feel such a strong affinity with what you're saying, and to see you saying it is really powerful. So thank you. Now, actually, I remember about 18 months ago, we had a conversation about Heriot-Watt's connections, in a way, to the abolition of slavery, because you found a document in the library about the Gibson Craig family, who used to live in a house that was probably actually built almost exactly on the spot we're speaking right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Would you like just to say a little bit about that story and Heriot-Watt's association, therefore, with it?
Well, it was one day, the usual days, I was sitting in the archive area of the library, and I think we were being lectured to by the principal. And I was sitting listening to what he was saying, and there was a box next to me. And I thought, I was very curious, because there was a sort of a brownish looking document in this box, a cardboard box. And I leant over and I picked it up, and there were 2 pages. And it was handwriting, and I start reading it, and the first thing on the top of this letter was private, in really large letters. So the person who wrote it didn't obviously want anybody to see it other than the person who it was being sent to.
Yeah.
And it then read, my dear father. And then I was taken aback. It said, we've just had the vote for the abolition of the apprenticeship. That means slavery, total. We've just had the vote. And the vote was 93 to 96, a majority of 3. And then he went on to say, which was important, and I won't speak all about what was in the letter, but what was significant was he also said the government deliberately constructed the vote to be after 9 o'clock at night. And he said for those reasons, a lot of the MP, the most of them, did not turn up. And he saw that as wrong. But the powerful phrase in that letter is towards the end of it, he said to his father, and remember, that letter was sent to this campus, because this was his father's house,
Rickerton House.
estate, Rickerton House. So we're sitting on where his father could be sitting reading that letter in 1838. And he ended that letter by saying, I voted with the majority for abolition, and I would do it again. Now, to me, that was a time when most MPs weren't turning up to vote.
Yeah.
People were scared to vote for abolition. But Gibson Craig, from this campus, this was his house. He was the MP for this area, the Member of Parliament. And he actually said he voted for abolition and he would do it again. That's the kind of conviction we need in terms of social matters where you're talking about human beings. Yeah. He said that was wrong, and if they asked him to vote again, he would not change it.
It was a really great find, Geoff, and I've heard you talk about this, and it's a very inspiring story. And I know that we've got this fragment, this letter framed up now,
right.
And people can come and view it in our museum, and it's really important to me, and I know it's really important to all the staff who've heard this story, and I hope this discussion we're having will encourage people to come along and look and come along and think about it, because it's a really important statement, as you say, of people that are going beyond words but actually into actions, yes, which is so important.
That's right.
I wondered whether you could talk a little bit more about your career here, because obviously you worked in brewing, and brewing sector is a global industry in itself. How has industry been using the scientific work that you did, and how did you see Heriot-Watt as being global in its outlook and enhancing its impact? Maybe there are some reflections from your own career about that.
Well, yes, I remember when I finished my first degree at Leicester University, I went back to London in 1964. And it hadn't occurred to me when I decided I was going to do an honours degree in botany that there were not many opportunities in London for botanists in 1964 when I got my degree. And I tried to get a research position, but that wasn't easy. So I was working in a restaurant, just peeling potatoes, which I thought was close enough to botany. But the alternative was working in a betting shop. So I peeled potatoes from June in 1964 when my degree was given, and I didn't see anything in terms of university opportunities.
Right.
And I had a famous interview with a very famous politician who told me to go home and grow bananas. Mm-hmm. And I told him it's not easy to grow bananas in Haringey. But that aside, I still was waiting. And then I saw this advert for the Heriot-Watt. Mm. And it was a very, I got to know her very well, but it was Professor Anna MacLeod.
Yes.
She was advertising for a PhD student.
I've read a lot about her and seen her photographs.
That's right.
Quite a big personality at the time.
Very big personality, yes, at the time. And you have one of your halls now is named after her.
Yes.
So I feel there's a connection there with me in that I arrived in Edinburgh in December 1964, and she was sitting at her desk in the basement of the Heriot-Watt then, which was mainly in Chambers Street, yes, in the city, overlooking the museum. So I arrived and I sat in front of her, a bit more around like that, and she was sitting like this and she smoked. at
Yes,
the time.
I've seen the pictures.
That's right. And she looked at me, and she just said, "Now, why do you want this position?" And I hadn't a clue why I wanted to work on barley, because barley wasn't regarded. I did an honours botany, and cereals were not regarded as acceptable plants because they were man-made. So I didn't know a lot about the barley or cereals. So I said, well, to her, I don't know anything about cereals. And she went, oh dear. And then she went on anyway. And she told me about the industry. And she says, what do you know about the brewing and distilling industries? And I said, like barley, not much. And then she said, I'm going to take you. And I said, why? And she said, well, young man, there's something about you which attracts me. And I said, well, what's that? And she said, when I was telling you all about barley and the industry, you were looking out the window. And I said, what's important about that? She said, it means you won't bother me. You'll think for yourself.
Well, she was absolutely right, wasn't she? She was absolutely right.
But Anna was like that. She wouldn't tell you why, but she checked on my background. I know she did. So she checked when I arrived in this country in 1955 on a banana boat. She checked on the difficulties I had at school when I was designated educationally subnormal. She checked on what I did at school. She checked on what I did at work before I went to university, and she checked on what I did for university. And I think she'd made up her mind on that. But the interview was had nothing to do with her decision making. Her decision making was on, and that was what we were trying to do then in terms of widening access to people from all backgrounds by looking at the degree of difficulty they had in achieving what they'd achieved.
And some of the personal contributions that you've made in terms of development to cereal science, of course, have enabled, to my understanding, communities in different places, in Africa, for example, to have viable industry, agricultural industries.
Yeah, that's correct.
What for you are some of the best examples of that?
Well, the work I did with Anna was on just the fundamental science. People see the Heriot-Watt mainly as sort of technological, but that technology is linked with science here, and the science is critical because it drives the technology. If you get the science right, the technology will be right. So I did a lot of fundamental research on barley, looking at how it works, looking at its physiology, its chemistry, and we came up with various concepts like, before we started our work, everybody thought the germ that grows produced the enzymes that digested the grain and changed it into malt. What we came up with was, which shocked everybody, the germ didn't do that. It was the bran. And because the bran did it, which goes around the grain, then normally the germ stimulates the bran, so the grain starts digesting itself one way. Because we found that the bran did it, if we damaged and allowed the bran to start at the back of the grain as well as the front, we could digest the grain from both ends, like putting two germ on it, and that's what we did.
So that enhanced productivity, as it were.
Productivity, it speeded up the process, so instead of taking 9 days, it took 7. So you save 2 days every 9 days. And within, when I finished that work, within 2 years, when that work was completed in the research institute, so I left the Watt with the science, went to industry, and developed that research into the technology. And that was called abrasion. So with that background, I came back to the Watt in 1977. I came back as a lecturer, and I stayed until I retired in 2005, I think. 2005 I left. But I'm still here.
Right. What did it feel like, or what do you feel like now to be known as the first black professor in Scotland? What does that? How does that resonate with you?
People use it when they introduce me.
Yes.
And it is, I don't often think of it, but it is something that can't be changed.
No.
And I think it's wonderful for the university, because without Anna taking me in 1964, then I wouldn't be sitting here today.